So once again, welcome back, everybody, and I hope that everyone enjoyed the lunch. And it's great to have you all back here now for our next session. So session 3, so the second panel discussion we've had at this year's conference, we're going to be looking at delivering economic security, the path to a self-reliant European space supply chain. So delighted again to have a fantastic lineup of speakers with us to discuss these issues. And delighted as well to have Isabel with us, Isabel Mauro, Director General for TSOA, who's going to be moderating the session and introducing our speaker. So Isabel, welcome. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, and welcome back, everybody. I'm glad to see that everybody made their way after the lunch. So this session, really, we are going to be looking at how we can deliver economic security and how we can achieve a path to a self-reliant European space supply chain. So as we've heard this morning, I think, as we navigate the complexity of an emerging space race, I think it's fair to say that Europe is really currently at a crucial crossroad in terms of leadership in the space domain, not only because of what is happening currently in the space domain, but also because Europe, as we know, is having or had elections, and so we are going to have a new commission, a new parliament. We have a new presidency that is starting, in a couple of weeks. So we are really at a crossroad from many fronts. And over the past year, as we've seen, also geopolitical tensions intensify, and that has led to an increasing dependency of the European Union when it comes to space-based technologies, components, and advanced services. It has had a profound effect, not only in Europe, but on the global economy, on national security, and of course on everyday life as well. So during this session, we're going to look at some of the actions that are needed to ensure the long-term sustainability, resilience, and competitiveness of the European space industry. How can we ensure that we take the right path and that we ensure a resilient supply chain in Europe that continues to support Europe's economic prosperity, as well as delivering societal well-being and the global leadership. So for some of the points we will be looking, it's one, the importance of fostering a culture of innovation, ensuring resilience and collaboration among European space stakeholders. We'll look into what is needed to ensure a steady flow of investment into cutting-edge technologies. And finally, how we can streamline some of the regulatory processes to accelerate the development and deployment of new space capabilities. So you are lucky. I am not the one who's going to provide you the answers on all these difficult questions, but I have a splendid panel here with Fabio Vitobello, who's the Space Policy Officer of Critical Space Technologies for the EU non-dependence at DG Defense. Christine Klein, who is the Head of Industrial Policy and Auditing Department at the European Space Agency. Marc Serre, who is the CEO of Luxembourg Space Agency. And last but certainly not least, Olivier Lemaitre, who is the Secretary General of Eurospace. So I'd like maybe to kick off with an introduction from all of you by really asking you a broader question around the supply chain. What are the key vulnerabilities and threats to the European space supply chain that you currently see, each of you from your own perspective or own organization's perspective? So Fabio, I'll start with you.
Yes, thank you, Isabel, and good afternoon to everybody. Pleased to be here together with you. So as you know, we've heard this morning talking about space, but making also space in relationship with other sectors. We strongly believe at DG Defis that indeed, space is not just a field of financial growth. It is basically a strategic sector, is relevant for security, for defense, also for enabling certain important fundamentals of our policy related to Green Deal, but also related to digitalization. So it is an area where we must be at the front end of the space, let's say, activities. because this is particularly relevant and important for the economy. Of course, we need to ensure competitiveness, but this actually comes together with the need of ensuring, let's say, access to technologies in an unrestricted manner. This means building technologies which are non-dependent. You asked very clearly what you believe, what believe to be the vulnerabilities of and the threats in this area. And actually, I can tell you that at DG DEFIS, at the Commission in general, it became very clear the fact that following the disruptions and let's say a dynamic scenario that came after the pandemic with the Ukrainian invasion, we really had to have a clear view of what are our dependencies, exactly quality description of our supply chains, understanding of where we have the gaps, where we have the issues, and let's say intervene in this respect. In terms of vulnerabilities and threats, definitely we see geopolitical tension as one of the threats. We've seen an increased number of protectionism that is indeed affecting our supply chains because it is indeed more and more using economical actions like, for example, non-EU export control with extraterritorial applicability, but also, for example, the need of requiring licenses that are reducing our unrestricted access to technology for those supply chains that indeed are partially or totally relying on non-EU actors. So this is definitely a threat. Vulnerability is coming from the fact that very often our supply chains are fragmented. Many of them, as I said, are relying on non-EU actors, and this is making them vulnerable because they are affected by bottlenecks, by disruptions that are not always under our control. And this has also impacts on, for example, lead time of our technologies, of our products. This can be very severe. For example, today, if you want to procure an HDI PCB, which is a very basic building block of any electronic components in our satellite, you need to wait for 58 weeks. This is a reasonable, let's say, realistic period of time, which is not matching what are, let's say, our needs and our schedule in terms of space missions. And the other, let's say, vulnerability and threat is related, of course, to technology dependencies. We are in a position, DG DEFIS, to really understand now, thanks to the fact that we implemented a number of instruments that are helping us to really understand the issues. And we realized that the number of dependency in the area of technologies are, let's say, a large number. Is going from raw materials, advanced materials, components, equipment up to system level. And definitely we need to intervene. We need to make sure that our European space industry is in a position to build upon EU-based supply chains and therefore, progress.
Thank you for introduction, Fabio. Christine, may I turn to you at ESA? And we've heard a few words from geopolitical tension, supply chain fragmentation, technology dependencies. From your side, do you mirror that? And what else do you see as vulnerabilities? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, and good afternoon to all, and thank you for having me here. I can only agree what you just said on the technology dependence that we have in Europe, but there's also the economic situation and the economic vulnerability that I would like to point out. So, space industry depends to a high extent on public demand. And if you look at the European market is comparatively small. The US has about a 6 times bigger market, public market, than we have in Europe. This means that the European space industry needs to already look much more for commercial opportunities, and has done this in the past, and has done this very successfully in the last years, with about 50% of the market share. But now we see the threats that we saw in the presentation also before lunch, that the market, this is accessible market, is shrinking. That means also that, of course, the share, even if we remain with 50%, in total is getting smaller for the space industry. And this comes now, this new situation, after a couple of events. We had COVID, we had inflation due to the geopolitical situation. So this is coming on top and on top for the European industry. Where does it lead to? We have a loss in certain areas for the industry. We have loss in business. We have loss in capabilities, and we have, last but not least, also loss in the workforce because they are looking at other areas that are more attractive. So business in other areas, for example, in defense, is getting more attractive than space. So I think this is something that we need to look in, how to secure a market, a public market for our industry that also then gives the incitation to reinvest into specific areas, and also then to reinvest into these areas where supply chain gaps need to be closed. I think what we can do is indeed trigger this appetite for investment, and also to keep up this continuous business in the space industry with the public demand overall. And this is not only ESA, it's also the European Union, that we work together to give this public demand to industry, and also their work as a long-serving customer and end user of industry, that they can have business perspectives for the next years.
Thank you, Christine. Mark, Luxembourg has some big players in the satellite industry and space. So from your perspective, where do you see the vulnerabilities there?
Well, I believe we are looking at space very much from the economic perspective. I think Ludwig mentioned or had a nice slide where we saw the motivations to invest in space, and definitely in Luxembourg, this is our main motivation. And so I would take it a bit like Christine just mentioned, from the side of the market. I think you will drain everything if you have customers, if you have applications, if you have services that can be delivered to the customers. And then you have this sort of cycle that works, because the companies can make revenues, they make profits, they can reinvest, they can innovate, and then the cycle works. And this is where we are a bit stuck today. The traditional markets of industry in Europe, I think, has shrinked dramatically, and now it remains only the institutional market, and it's too small. And so I believe that we need to work on that. And of course, one element is to increase public money investment, but it's not necessarily the only way we should look into it. We need to stimulate the use of space in the other sectors. I think, again, coming back to one of the slides of Ludwig, I mean, the benefit is, elsewhere than just in space. And this is where we believe that there is a lot to do still, to create these opportunities, future opportunities for space data, space systems. All what is behind this value chain needs to be driven by applications, by services, by customers. And that will also stimulate, again, investment by the private sector. This is extremely important. If this is not working, this is a bad sign for the economy. We need to have enthusiastic investors as well. So in addition, then we have to look into the future. It's not only now looking at what was bad, but we still have opportunities. We probably will have difficulties to catch up with the things that happen today, but we need to anticipate now what comes tomorrow. Otherwise, we will be in the same situation in a few years, where new opportunities will come and we will not be ready. And I say, means the whole ecosystem, being it private, public sector, everyone who is involved in these activities. So it's not only about now complaining that we are in a bad situation. I think we need now also to look into what our next opportunities will be.
Thank you, Mark, and agree with that. And we'll have the opportunity to dwell a bit more on these future opportunities. Olivier, from your side, from the industry.
Yeah, I can go very quick. I agree with Christine.
You agree with everybody? Okay.
In-
That's good.
In a longer version, I think yes that we have three problems in Europe for the moment as far as industry is concerned. We have, and it has been mentioned, we have a market problem. We have a demand that is in general not sufficient to sustain the sector. Our traditional customer, commercial customer, are not in a good situation. The competition is increasing, and we have an institutional element that is small. It has been mentioned, also very fragmented. Meaning that we have a serious issue in industry. We have an issue of profitability. And if we do not make profit, we cannot invest neither in human resources, nor in R&D, nor in future development. So that's clearly a serious problem. And I know that at the institutional level, nobody really wants to speak about the profitability of industry, but that's the way the economy functions. So we need to address this. Then it has been mentioned too, that we have a serious competition issue, and in particular with SpaceX that has completely disrupted the launcher market, and Starlink, which is completely disrupting the satellite segment. So it's besides competition in general, we have this specific competition with SpaceX and Starlink. But there is another third problem, I would say, that is probably less often mentioned. We have a political problem in Europe. If we look at all the ambition, especially of member states that are for the moment the major actor in the development of the European space policy in general, all European institutional actors, they see space first and foremost as a way to develop their own national industry. So the focus is always on developing the industry. And I know it might seem paradoxical having an industry representative complaining about the fact that institutions want to develop industry. It's nice, but everybody has this little recipe. So some countries want to support mid-caps, some countries want to support startups, some SMEs. So everybody has a recipe to develop industry, which is cool. The thing is that none of this development in industry will ever happen as long as the member states are not addressing the fact that we need to increase the institutional demand. We need to develop capabilities, operational capabilities. So we are lucky, and I'm crossing fingers, that we have no IRIS² in development. I mean, they need to be launched. This is the first time in ages that at European level, we decide to develop a new operational capabilities. Last time was Copernicus, it was 15 years ago. I'm not mentioning meteorology, but I know my friend Paul Kone is here. But it's so my point is that we focus in Europe in developing industry as if the demand, as if the market will emerge spontaneously out of the blue, and it's not happening. So we need to do something. We need to develop this market. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you all. I think you've opened the path for many things. We've heard about the sort of political problem that we have, the competition increasing, and is becoming kind of nearly a tailored competition because it's against some specific actors compared, to a broader market. We have a problem of the market, which I think we've heard from all, and we've also the need to increase public money, invest, and many other things. And against that background, maybe Christine, I want to turn back to you. You mentioned many of the things that we are already doing, but what, in your view, what is already in place? For instance, for ESA, what already do you have in place that is working to address these vulnerabilities? What is in the pipeline where they are not yet been addressed? And what lessons can we learn that we can, maybe ESA can share with other space agencies at that national level, or in Europe? So,
Okay. Yes. First of all, ESA is, of course, an R&D organization. And over the last decades, we have put a lot of emphasis on technology development and innovation. You see it in a lot of programs. We have a lot of technology development programs in specific areas. We have started with business incubation centers 20 years ago. We have now a network of business incubation centers. And also now we are starting to build up a PhilAb net to really bring academia together with commercial interests to really foster here also the innovation. At the last ministerial, we set up a specific or two specific components. First of all, the EEE program to really focus on the development of specific components, and also we have introduced activities for increasing the manufacturing level of industry, really to support them there also to scale up their business. We also have specific SME policies where we try to foster the integration of SMEs into the space industry. We have about 1,700 SMEs with 3,000 employees working for ESA in the contracts. I think these are things that we do. What we also do in terms of critical capabilities, we have internal coordination where we look at specific bottlenecks in the supply chain and try to detect together with our member states areas where industry could develop, where industry could also get into the niches of these supply chain. We also have started a supplier evaluation process to see where the weaknesses of our suppliers are, where we can help them to further develop. Now, these are the things that we are doing. You asked what is in the pipeline. I think we see, and now we come back to the profitability or the financial sustainability of our industry. We see that currently there is no appetite. I know, Olivier, you will not agree with appetite, but for co-funding, we can also say there's not the capacity for co-funding currently in industry. And we are discussing internally how to react on this, especially in the technology development programs, what we can propose for the next ministerial. We are also looking at reviewing the ECSS standards to simplify them, and also to have a mission classification, really to see which classes of missions are linked to which risks and which requirements we need. So there we are really trying to streamline our ways of working with industry and for industry. Lessons learned, I came a bit later. I do not know if the Director General has mentioned it already. We're going through a transformation process in ESA to speed up. I know we have a lot of work to do there to reduce administrative burden, to increase to reduce the time to contract, and also there to see how we can change our mindset to work with industry to be more reactive and also give more more responsibility really here to industry. There's a lot to do. There's a lot in the pipeline, but we're really working a lot on this.
Good. And we heard this morning as well, I think, from some of the speakers that, you know, at least on the policy side, but we know that you are in R&D, but there is a lot of work that is ongoing between ESA as well and you know, and the Commission. But from the Commission perspective, and particularly of DEFIS, Fabio, you know, we've heard, I mean, some of the issues, the vulnerabilities you mentioned, were in particular geopolitical tensions and some increasing protectionism that we are seeing across the board, a fragmented supply chain, and also technology dependencies that are increasing. So from your perspective, and you mentioned some of them, but what are the strategic initiatives that you know you are implementing so that you know Europe is not so Europe becomes more self-reliant for the supply chain and reduces the dependencies from non-EU players?
Yeah. So, okay, first of all, allow me to say that, okay, DG DEFIS at the Commission, the Space Work Program was already, let's say, implementing specific activities aiming at reducing the dependence since a number of years. But following, let's say, the pandemic, the changing situation at geopolitical level, we also realized that we had to be more and more precise in what we wanted to, let's say, support and chirurgically, let's say, intervene on our supply chains to make them more resilient, to make them less dependent. So first of all, as I said briefly in my introduction, our intention was to develop a tool that would allow us to have a clear mapping of the issues. As a matter of fact, actually, the Commission has established the Observatory of Critical Technologies that is also serving the space needs. As a matter of fact, is the combination of space defense and civil industry. And DG DEFIS is co-leading this activity with the intention to, let's say, complement, expand our knowledge or what are, let's say, the supply chains that have certain level of gaps, certain level of dependencies, which kind of dependency is in place, and what are, let's say, the weaknesses of our supply chains, as well as also putting in place what we call EU technology roadmaps. This is an important change that we try to implement because we are trying to move away, or let's say to expand our activities, not only, let's say, from a bottom-up type of approach, but also complementing this approach with a top-down, therefore technology-driven. And this is something that we are currently in the making. And this information is eventually used for feeding our EU space policy, as well as our EU space programs in the area of R&D. Actually, we have in our space R&D work program a dedicated section related to critical space technology for EU non-dependence. And here we cover, for example, Tripoli components, advanced materials, equipment, subsystems that must be indeed developed in EU for then serving our EU space missions. And in this respect, actually, a few years ago, we also upholded our activities, increasing the budget on an annually basis, but also with the intention to constantly, let's say, support these technologies and helping the technology to mature along the entire, let's say, TRL level. Allow me to say that R&D activities are not, let's say, providing the solution as a whole. They are complementing, but they are not the only solution. We realized that R&D activities must be supported by other instruments. There are type of technologies that are a level of dependency that even if we have, let's say, budget on the table, they, let's say, cannot be developed because the sustainability aspect is an issue. And I'm coming back to Olivier. Indeed, in certain areas, we have low volumes that cannot justify the industry to embark in certain development. That's why, on our side, we try to enlarge the pie, building synergies with other domains. For example, defense is one of the natural area where we have many dual-use technologies, where we can expand. We have, let's say, continuous conversation with our Directorate Aid of DG DEFIS, EDF program, but also the European Defence Agency to indeed put together needs and efforts. But also, for example, our activities in the area of digitalization, we try to also exploit the CHIPS Act for the benefit of space. So we are in direct contact with our colleagues in DG Connect, as well as, for example, the area of raw materials. We had a Raw Materials Act. Here in space, we have a number of dependencies also at the level of raw materials. So we cannot intervene directly from space side point of view, but we need to join efforts with other sectors to be effective. Allow me to also, last but not least, mention another aspect that I would like to come back to what also Olivier said. Indeed, we need, since we have low volumes, everybody needs to make an effort, and we need to joint efforts and coordinate in order to support, let's say, also with institutional demand with respect to industry. We are trying as much as we can, and we are reflecting how to do it even better, how to indeed exploit the EU supply chains. Once we invest in developing an EU solutions, we need to also do the exercise of using it. And we want to indeed exploit our EU space missions to facilitate the insertion of EU technologies and close the loop, let's say, to at least complement or support the usage of use technologies, and indeed, from an institutional point of view, complement the demand that is coming from the market.
Thank you. Thank you for all these thoughts, and maybe I'll turn to Olivier, like from the industry side. You know, so you mentioned something about R&D, and that R&D needs, of course, to be complemented by other things, which, you know, Olivier, you may have learned. We heard this morning that I believe to achieve, you know, we need 3% of the GDP to be spent on R&D in order to achieve, if you want leadership in Europe, in 5 areas, including space, I think AI and quantum. And we are currently at 0.07%. So I'd be very interested to hear from you, and maybe later from Mark as well, if you know, like what can be done in that area, and what is your view. But more particularly, you know, what are the sort of the strategies that we can employ to secure a steady flow of investment? You're talking of low volumes. And also, and I'm condensing a lot in one question, but because I think you can put it together, how do we secure, you know, how do we motivate other sectors of the economy to invest as well in space? Because at the moment we seem to see space as a silo. You know, we're just launching rockets there and then satellites, and we're doing all sorts of things, but there is an end to that, which is also serving other industries. So I'd be curious as well to know, you know, what's the collaboration from the industry side with these other industries as well, and yeah, and how do we attract more investment? What do we need?
There are so many questions. Okay, let's focus on investment. So the question is, how do we motivate people in general in investing in space? Well, you invest into something, into an economic activity, if you are relatively optimistic about getting a return on investment. That's relatively obvious. For the moment, we see many investment being done in or having been done there. It's decreasing in the so-called new space startup sector. With the, I mean, it's venture capital, so those people expect many of those companies to collapse and a few of them to make a huge amount of money. Okay. So my point is, to motivate people into investing, you need to reassure them about the return on investments. And return on investment exists when you have market. I'm coming back, sorry, it's kind of an obsession, but I'm coming back to the importance of not only having market, but having a sufficient volume of activity. And we tend to forget that space is what we call a capital-intensive industry. It means that we need a lot of money in white rooms, in plants, to be able to issue and to put a product on the market. Meaning that if we want to make profit, we need to have a high volume of demand, because in a high capitalistic industry, if you don't have a high volume of production, then you are not making profits. So we come back to square one. We need a market. Then what was the next question? Perhaps about investment once again, and the fact that we need to convince the other sector to invest in space. I don't really agree with that, but perhaps it's a personal political opinion. We tend to forget that space in general in the world and also in Europe is mostly public infrastructure. So in the infrastructure delivering public services. Sometimes it's not public, and telecommunication was private, but all the work was done, the de-risking was worked by the public. So mostly space is an infrastructure that is delivering public services. And there is nothing bad in this. I mean, you have roads and bridges that are supporting the economy, and nobody complains that roads and bridges are being paid by the government, and that helps the economy to expand. So perhaps we should refocus a little bit on the fact that space is an enabling technology. It's something that enables you to do other things, meteorology, telecommunication, PNT, whatever, and perhaps stop dreaming too much. I'm not saying stop dreaming at all, but stop dreaming too much about space becoming kind of a B2B sector capable of being sustainable only on the private market. I think this is part of our problem in Europe.
And can I just ask on that, do you think what you just said, that, you know, there is a tendency, like we dream about B2B, or do you think that Europe thinks differently than other countries think about that?
I think that we have the same dreams as in the US, but not the same level of investment on the table. So we dream of copying what we think is happening in the US, while actually not playing in the same game. So we are hoping that, I mean, and I'm getting completely allergic of political decision makers saying we need our European Elon Musk. I mean, okay, but we need the US, we need the US demands, and then we can discuss. So there is, yes, there is really a paradox between our expectation and our blindness to the local reality.
Yeah. And we need an entrepreneur in Europe that has some space, is passionate about space, no? Because I think that's what we've seen as well in other countries.
You're provoking me, right?
I am, yes. Mark, like, you know, one of the things we haven't touched upon is security. So we're talking here about, you know, the flexibility that is required to respond in a way to the rapid evolution that we are seeing of the space sectors. And how do we balance that as well with, you know, what is needed, for instance, to have security and you know, the role that we play in terms the space plays in security.
I think a lot of things will come by themselves as long as you have an ecosystem that works. And that's a bit the problem here for the moment. We don't have this virtuous cycle of having the economy that works. And I would say what the bet that we are making in Luxembourg is to look already into the future. So invest more in innovation, and as well as trying to stimulate investors to come in. I mean, you were talking about return on investment, but sometimes the things are so basic that these investors even do not know, you know, that there is an economic aspect to space. They just think about astronauts, they think about space exploration, how dangerous it is, how far it is, how expensive it is, and the reality is very different. So there is sort of basic education sometimes to be done in this sector, I mean, in the investment community. And I believe there is a lot of potential still there, because there are plenty of investors that need to be educated. So I think return on investment, this is when you have already an investor that knows that there is something useful, or let's say a return to be gained in the space sector. So this is definitely where we are now sort of betting innovation and private involvement or private investment.
How do we stimulate, like, how do we educate those investors on you know, all the sort of possibilities that there are for them to invest? Like, I mean, what do we need to do, like, from an industry perspective, from a, you know, policymakers perspective?
There is no secret. I mean, you have to talk with them, you have to invite them to events, you have to show success stories, you have to bring them together with industries. I mean, there is a lot of efforts to be done, but at the end, it's not something, you know, it's not rocket science.
So we'll see as well with Dan, you know, to make sure we get more of the investors in the room. But perhaps before we turn to the audience for some questions, I just wanted to check maybe with you all, turning more to a sort of policy perspective, what are the adjustments that you think Europe needs to make to its policy, but also its economic model, in order to address its ambition, both, not only of being a leader in the space economy, but also of reaching universal connectivity? Because as we know, some of the SATCOM, for instance, have a very important role to play in connectivity. So I know we've touched upon some of these things, each of you, but holistically, what do you think can be done? And one question I would like to ask as well, for whoever wants to respond in that context, more of policy. We've heard about the EU space law this morning. Do we think that, how can this EU space law help on, for instance, increasing competitiveness, of the space sector in Europe? So in no particular order, I don't know who wants to go first. Marc?
I'm ready to break the ice.
Fire.
Well,
Fire.
so you talked about universal connectivity. I believe that we have players in Europe who can offer this, but we need a customer. We need someone who gives the contracts to industry, someone who buys the services, because this is definitely an industry where Europe is mature enough and has even worldwide champions. And I mean, that's going much beyond what the European Union is doing for the moment. But the European Union could be a customer for these type of services and for the industry behind. So that's now on connectivity, if you like. For other types of adaptations, there are probably many to do. But I agree with Olivier. I think we should not dream of having something without investing in it. And I would say the first thing we need to do, if we have these ambitions, we have to invest more, much more than what we have invested up to now.
Olivier, maybe I turn to you.
Yeah, I will
On the-
skip the topic of universal connectivity. But regarding the EU space law, clearly one of the ambitions of the EU space law, an ambition that we do support, is the fact that Europe might play a role in space traffic management. And space traffic management will require innovatively new technologies. Nobody's today really mature enough to do space traffic management or to devise a system of space traffic management, not even in the US. I mean, you were very much afraid in 2018 with USPD3 that the US was going to go very fast. Actually, they didn't go super fast, so we still can race. So we have a new field of development that will be required, and perhaps that's a way for Europe to take some advance. Certainly not in space surveillance and tracking, because very obviously we are already very much dependent from the US. I mean, we might being a bit less dependent, but apart from that, there are new system collision avoidance or whatever that can be developed, and that for which Europe can seize the opportunity. So that's one of the opportunities that might come with the future EU space law. I'm trying to be optimistic here.
Fabio, would you
Yeah,
agree with that? And also, in your view, what are the sort of policy and economic models we look into?
So first of all, okay, I agree with what Olivier said. We need to keep in mind that, as we heard also this morning, the EU space law is indeed a regulation that will, I mean, the main focus is not competitiveness, just to be clear. I mean, it might contribute to that, but the main focus is to reduce fragmentation of the single market in the area of space due to a number of regulations that are taking place. For me, the main, let's say, shift that we need to implement and take into consideration in the policy, together with the economic demand, is, let's say, a policy that is supporting sustainability, as I said already. This is a key factor sustainability will only be coming with a sufficient level of volumes. This is coming from definitely the institution might and should make their part, but it's also very important to align the institutional demand with private demand. It was mentioned earlier in SpaceX and what is happening in US. Over there, for me, it is a clear example of good, let's say, alignment between private and public needs and, let's say, demand. And this is somehow supporting the sustainability. The sustainability, as I said, should be enforced, should be somehow supported coming from the space needs, but as I said also, it should also come from enlarging the pie and trying to build, let's say, volumes that are also coming from other sectors. This is a key element, in my opinion.
Isabelle, if you allow me, I'd like to also react on what Olivier said in terms of EU space law. Generally, you don't make a law just for the sake of making a law. And I think here, I mean, we haven't seen what is written today in the proposal, but I hope, as Olivier as well, that it's a law that will stimulate and help and create opportunities, because otherwise we are shooting in our foot. And I agree that there are certainly opportunities related to new regulatory frameworks, but you have then to set the frame that enables, you know, these new opportunities. So I cross fingers that this is the case.
Yeah, I think we all do, and Christine as well from DC. And then
Okay, I don't want to comment on the space law, but I want to come back to this market and to this market demand. And I heard earlier, well, it's not only R&D alone, we also need to have then missions, ambitions there, but it's also not missions alone or ambitions or constellations. We need to bring this together to really have the circle to make the supply chain resilient. If we go too fast with new ambitions, with new ideas, then the industry has the problem of not catching up with the R&D and the technology development. And with this, industry gets dependent from non-European suppliers. So we need to have this both hand in hand, to have the R&D development, to then go towards an infrastructure, towards a mission. Let's take Copernicus or also IRIS², to have this as a circle. I think this is very important also for the industry to have this. Coming to getting other areas, other businesses inside, indeed, this is something that we work on. But I agree with Olivier, it's very difficult. If you talk to suppliers in the automotive and you say, why don't you invest into space? Maybe you should look there. And they say, I am producing millions per year. I cannot live with 1 or 2 supplies per year to the space industry. So there we also need to be realistic that space industry and working in space is something different than other areas of industry.
very well, and point taken. I'm looking at the room if maybe you want to open the floor for some questions that you may have for the panelists. Any hands up? So I see a lady there. If you can just identify yourself, and if you have somebody in particular you want to ask the question to, that's very helpful as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Christine Lorca. I'm working in my own consultancy company today. Used to work for SES for a long time. Now, I wanted to ask questions to Marc in particular, but also to the others around the table, particularly to DG DEFIS. We're talking about investment, and rightly you said, Marc, we need to bring investors to Europe to invest and to continue to support the space industry. The question I have is that based on what we talked about the space law, about the security and resilience of our networks, there is a reluctance really to have foreign or non-European stakeholders investing into our European companies and our future space. industry. So isn't there a contradiction there? Mark, I wanted to have these questions to you because I know that it's a big issue for some of the Luxembourg companies who are not owned by a pure 100% European companies. And it's an issue for many others because the investors in majority are not in Europe. They are outside of Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine, for this very interesting question. Yeah, I think you are touching a very important point, and I think this is why we have to educate also European investors. They exist. It's not because they are not yet ready today to invest in space that they don't exist. So this is a work that I think we are doing collectively. Yeah, there are initiatives at EU level, there are initiatives within ESA, there are initiatives in different countries. So I think there is a collective efforts today to stimulate and to bring also more European investors around the table. So having said that, yes, the reality is that for the moment, the investment community comes a lot from the other side of the ocean. And yeah, we have to deal with it. So I would say the culture we have in Luxembourg is generally a more open culture from that perspective. And so we accept, of course, that we also have foreign investments in these companies. Now we have to find the right balance. It's also good to have investors that invest in the companies. It's not only a bad thing, but of course we have to balance it with respect to maybe other considerations that can be more sort of security driven. And then we have, of course, to find this balance. But it's not in all cases that you need to restrict in a certain sense or to try to avoid too much dependency on international investors.
Olivier, I think, Fabio, okay, Fabio, you go.
Yeah, so I think that you raised an interesting question. I can tell you that I don't see, let's say, a contradiction, and allow me to explain you the reason. So foreigner investments into, let's say, our space industry in Europe is not a problem per se. We have the Foreign Direct Initiative, a regulation of the Commission applicable in all the member states that is very clear in this particular context. We want to somehow have, we are involved in the actual process every time there is a foreign investment. And what we look at is whether the investment, let's say, is really bringing benefit to the industry, making the industry growing, and also, let's say, allowing the industry to provide a certain technology on the long term to our space industry and in general to all the space stakeholders, let's say. It becomes a problem when, for example, the control of the company is made in a way that is limiting this. It becomes a problem where, for example, the intention of the company is certain number of years or very afterwards is to shut down the company, therefore letting us in a difficult situation where the technology is not longer available in Europe. It becomes a problem when, for example, there is a leakage of information from one side to the other, I mean, from inside Europe to outside Europe, depending where it is going, but definitely it becomes a problem when the technology is relevant for security reasons. So there are a number of very, very precise cases that represents an issue. But in general terms, foreign investments are welcome, obviously.
Thank you, Fabio. I think there was another question somewhere there. Do we have another question? No? Okay, so I think we're good. Well, you know, we've heard, so my takeaway before I go into my final question, you know, we need to increase volumes if we want to increase investment. We need an alignment between the institutional and the private demand. We need also, of course, to stimulate, to create opportunities, whether it's investors or others, industry as well. And also we need a circle, like the R&D development needs to go in a way hand in hand with the supply chain if you want the other side, and you really, it is a circle. You can't put one before the other. But really to conclude, you know, if each of you had a magic wand and, you know, in 2 little words, you could say what would be the priorities, you know, what are the 2 things that Europe needs to prioritize in order to ensure sustainability, resilience, and competitiveness of the supply chain in our space industry? Olivier.
Yeah, very quickly. First thing, we need to know at European level what kind of capabilities we need. As soon as we know about the capabilities, all the rest should be relatively obvious. And second, we do need a European-wide industrial strategy for space. And when I say European-wide, I say an industrial strategy for space that is common to all EU institutional actors, member states, whether individually or within ESA, and the EU. If we don't have an industrial strategy for space, we are dead.
Mark?
Well, I have 3 words: a larger market, that's already 2, and innovation. I think those are the 2 points on which we would dream of having more.
Christine?
I would say real European cooperation on all levels, and with this triggering a big sustainable market.
Fabio?
To add to what we've already heard, that obviously I agree, is larger investments in the aerospace, because definitely we are far behind, let's say, what is happening outside Europe. And this goes together with our competitiveness. And also, I would repeat that we need to really implement a coherent and coordinated approach, including all the stakeholders, so that together we can be successful and we can help the overall European space industry.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to all of you. And maybe we'll come back next year at the same time and see if there's, you know, that magic wand worked and if we have progressed, and we'll take stock. So thank you again to all of you. Thank you so much. And thank you to the audience. Thank you.